from the waiting room. Thank you all for coming to our seminar today. This is the first seminar of our fall seminar series here at the Carey Institute virtual event. There are upcoming seminars starting at the same time, moving forward every Thursday, 11 o'clock Eastern time. So we hope that you can join us for those. Before I introduce our speaker today, I wanted to just give everybody some brief kind of logistical information. If you have questions for the speaker today, please put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And if you have logistical issues, voice isn't working, screen won't show up, those should go in the chat. Also, if people have a second, please let us know where you're calling in from. One of the real benefits of being virtual is that we have a global audience today. So those are just some technical notes, logistical notes. Appreciate everybody being here. I am thrilled to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Kapila Yakandawala, who is a professor and the chair of the Landscape Gardening and Horticulture Department at Wayamba University in Sri Lanka. Kapila is an expert in plant propagation and management, particularly thinking about a landscape approach. He's very interested in encouraging native plant usage for sustainability, conservation, and biodiversity. Kapila is currently a Fulbright Scholar in the lab where I did my graduate work with Emily Miner at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And so I wanted to bring him here to Carey to share some of his fascinating work with us and hopefully broaden our horizons even further. So thank you very much, Kapila, for joining us. I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Elsa. Hello, everybody. Aibowan. This is the traditional way of greeting in Sri Lanka. Aibowan means long life. So this is actually very much appropriate for today's pandemic situation because no hugs and no shake hands. So I am from Sri Lanka and I don't think many of you have been to Sri Lanka, so we are here. So Sri Lanka is an island, and if you look at the country, central part is covered with mountains. And in the central part, we have mainly tea plantations, and Ceylon tea is world famous. And the country is surrounded by beautiful beaches, and we are famous for our gems. And if you visit to Sri Lanka, you can see the world's largest land mammal, the elephants, as well as the world's largest sea mammal, blue whales within, say, about 2 hours drive. So that is a brief introduction to Sri Lanka. So with that, let me move to my topic. Tropical biodiversity, thinking beyond conservation in the island nation of Sri Lanka. So in today's talk, I'm going to give a very brief introduction to the biodiversity of Sri Lanka. Then I would like to share with you my research experience related to the biodiversity conservation in Sri Lanka. Then I would like to move to the research conducted related to the sustainable utilization of tropical biodiversity in anthropogenic landscapes, and finally about some threats to the biodiversity. So with that, let me move to the biodiversity of the country. So if you look at Sri Lanka, we are rich in biodiversity and endemism because of the unique location, because we are in the tropics and it is geographically isolated from the mainland. And if you look at the topography, center of the country, as you can remember, is covered with mountains. And based on the climates, we can divide the country into 3 main zones: wet zone, intermediate zone and the dry zone. So if you look at the climate, you can see differences in rainfall pattern, temperature, and soil type. And the country is covered with about 21% of the country is covered with forest. And if you look at the wet zone, most of the angiosperm endemic plants are concentrated in the wet zone of the country. So with the biodiversity, let me now move to the diversity of flora and fauna in the country. And here you can see a list of main groups of plants and animals. So if you look at the flowering plants, angiosperms, 25% is endemic to the country. And if you look at freshwater crabs, 100% is endemic. So you can see in certain groups, high endemism can be seen. So with that, let me move to the ecosystem diversity of the country. So if you look at our ecosystem diversity, we can basically divide into terrestrial ecosystem and aquatic ecosystems. And when you look at the terrestrial ecosystem, we can again group them into natural forest ecosystems, and we have different types and different grassland ecosystems. Then in aquatic, we have freshwater aquatic system and different coastal ecosystems. So that is a brief introduction to the biodiversity of the country. And though we are rich in biodiversity, unfortunately, we have been recognized as one of the 39 global biodiversity hotspots. This is due to the high endemicity and extensive loss of these endemic plants, as well as their natural habitats due to anthropogenic activities. So if you look at certain groups like angiosperms, nearly 37% is threatened. Amphibian, 66%. So you can see certain groups are more threatened. So with that brief introduction to the biodiversity of the country, now let me move to my research experience in the conservation of biodiversity. So first of all, I would like to mention that before any conservation work, it is very important to identify the species. So species identification is key for the biodiversity conservation. Without identification of species, we can't conserve, we can go for any conservation activities. So my research experience is mainly focused on actually aquatic plants. So let me now discuss our work related to the aquatic plant diversity. So if you look at aquatic flora, I have particularly worked on this genus Lagenandra. If you look at the genus Lagenandra, it belongs to the family Erroneous, and globally we have 19 species distributed in Sri Lanka, India, and Bangladesh. So it is basically only in the South Asian countries, and in Sri Lanka, 12 species were recorded, and out of that, 11 are endemic to the country, and of that, you see, 10 is endangered, and 1 is critically endangered. So if you look at the diversity of genus Lagenandra, out of the 12 species recorded in Sri Lanka or 19 species recorded globally, we have contributed with 4 new species. So I would like to particularly mention about this endangered species, Lagenandra erosa. It is considered as critically endangered because after 1800s, it has not been collected in Sri Lanka. Very unfortunate. So even during the revision of the flora, it was not recorded. So even we don't have a herbarium specimen in our national herbarium, but you can see a herbarium specimen in the Kew Botanical Gardens. If you look at live plants, we don't have any, even not only naturally, even under human landscapes. But in Netherlands, they have live specimens. So they widely use these species in aquarium industry. So with that brief introduction to the genus Lagenandra, let me move further to into this genus. So if you look at this genus, it is very globally very popular in aquarium industry because it is widely used as a background plant in aquarium, as you can see here. So apart from other threats for the aquatic plants, you all know that invasive plants, habitat loss, pollution, etc. are the general threats for these aquatic plants. But apart from these threats, due to this attractive nature, this is highly threatened because still illegal over exploitations are going on in, unfortunately, in our country. So not only local people, even foreigners are involved in this. So it is a very sad situation, because if you look at the majority of the species are very attractive, as you can see here. This is Lagenandra thwetsai. If you look at this plant, margin of the leaf has a silver line. So without any improvement in the natural condition, it is very attractive and you can use it in the aquarium plant industry. So still people collect these plants. And if you remember, this is highly threatened group. Majority of the species are threatened. So overexploitation can disappear this plant from the world. So in our studies, we have first look at the distribution of the species. So we look apart from the recorded location in previous studies, we tried to identify new location for this group because most of the species are threatened. So this information will be useful in habitat and species conservation work. So here you can see wet zone of the country. So this genus is mainly distributed in the wet zone of the country along the roads, along the streams and streamlets. So if you look at the wet zone, we have a lot of streamlets. So we have explored along these streamlets and small rivers for this genus. And this is the most common species in genus Lagenandra. You call Lagenandra platimissa. So it is widely distributed. So we have recorded the distribution. Apart from that, we have studied the morphological features of all the species. We have collected samples from the field. Then we have studied the quantitative and qualitative morphological characters. And these studies are very important to identify the species limits, as well as we can develop keys using morphological characters. And these keys are very important for field biologists, particularly in customs, in exit and entry points of the country. When people export material, even without flowers, if we have a very good key, people can, officers can identify species. So this is very important because this is a threatened group. So based on the morphometric study, we have identified 4 new species. As you can see here, apart from the recorded species, we have identified 4 new species. But remember, during field excursions, we couldn't identify the Lagenandra erosa, and I think it has disappeared from the world, I guess. So still we are looking for that. We couldn't identify it. So it is not given here. We could identify it. So this resulted in 4 new clusters, which resembles 4 new species. And if you look at the molecular studies, we have conducted molecular studies as well, and it also confirmed the occurrence of 4 new species. So this is the phylogenetic tree constructed based on DNA sequence data. And if you look at the habitat modeling, apart from the previous locations and locations we recorded during the present study, we use spatial environmental covariates like bioclimatic data as well as elevation data to construct models. So this is an example for the model constructed for Lagenandra lancifolia. In black color dots, you can see the location used for modeling. So after modeling, we visited the areas with highest possibility to find these species. As an example, if you look at the red color area, it has 75 to 100% possibility to find the species. Then orange color areas have 50 to 75% possibility of finding species. So we have visited these two, red and most of the orange color areas, to find new location. And we found new locations for these species, and it is given in blue in color. So we recorded 4 additional location after modeling. So we have validated the model, and we have conducted modeling for all the species, and still the study is continuing. And identification of these new locations are important for in situ conservation work, as well as uplifting the conservation status of this genus, because majority of the species are listed as highly threatened. So to uplift the conservation status, this sort of studies are very important. So with that, here you can see the plants we discovered during our study, 4 new plants. This is called Lagenandra Wayamba. We have named it after the Wayamba University of Sri Lanka, because my university funded for this research initially. Then this work is published. Then we have also encountered another 2 species, Lagenandra kalugelensis and Lagenandra sri lankensis. So this plant was named to highlight the location we collect this plant, because it was just outside the protected area. So we want to protect, insist policymakers to protect not only the protected area, even just outside the protected areas also consist with a lot of biodiversity. So we name it to resemble the location, and this one after my country, Sri Lanka, Lagenandra sri lankensis. And those we have submitted the manuscript, and manuscript is accepted for publication. And this one we recently found, and we have submitted the manuscript for a journal. So those are the 4 new species. If you look at those 4 species, all are endemic, all are highly threatened, because distribution is highly restricted. We found in either 1 or 2 locations. So, and if you look at the population size is about, say, 20 species or so. So populations are small in size, and these are very attractive. Flowers are attractive, and the leaves are attractive, and the size is very much suitable for the aquarium. So these 4 species are also highly threatened, because, as I mentioned you all earlier, once we publish, people can collect these plants from the wild. So this can disappear pretty soon, because if you look at publications, if you look at this one, internationally, in the aquarium industry, scientists use these plants to produce new hybrids. So if you look at this one, they use Lagenandra thwetsai, Sri Lankan variety and Indian variety, to produce new hybrids. So these hybrids have a very high market in the aquarium industry. So this industry is a direct threat to the existence of these species. So because it's very important to explore the gene pool and develop new plants, hybrids, so we can use it. That is a very good thing, but we have to do it in a sustainable manner. That is the most important thing. When we use biodiversity, using sustainable matter is one important thing. Then other one is sharing royalty, because when other people come and use this gene pool to improve and produce new plants, actually they should share the royalty between the 2 countries, between the original country, because then we can use that money to conserve these habitats. So sharing royalty is very important. We have to use this biodiversity for the betterment of humankind, but sharing royalty is also very, very important. Unfortunately, it is not happening right now. Okay, with that, let me move to this second genus where I worked, genus Nymphaea, or when I call waterlilies. Everybody knows of waterlilies. So we explored the waterlilies, wild waterlilies in Sri Lanka. And there are 2 groups of waterlilies. This is the night blooming waterlily group. So these flowers bloom in the night time and fade in the daytime. This is the day blooming water lilies. These bloom in the daytime and close their flowers during night time and again bloom in the following day morning. So these are the two groups. So this group is mainly consisted with Nymphaea pubescens, and during field studies we have encountered with a red color flower, and we identified it as Nymphaea rubra, and it was the first record of Nymphaea rubra in Sri Lanka, but it was recorded in other countries, but this was the first record for Sri Lanka, Nymphaea rubra. And we extensively studied about the day blooming water lilies, Nymphaea nouchali group. If you look at this group, you can see this group has 3 different color flowers, light blue color variety, pink color flower, and white color flower. So we studied morphological as well as molecular level on this Nymphaea nouchali group. So when we study this group, we have recognized 2 infraspecific taxa in the Nymphaea nouchali group. So earlier, Nymphaea nouchali was recognized into 2 variety level. Nymphaea nouchali variety nouchali, which represent the blue color flowers, and Nymphaea nouchali variety versicolor, which represent the white color flowers and pink color flowers. But during the revisions of flora, they put all these groups together into a single group and identified it as Nymphaea nouchali. But during the morphological studies, here you can see we have clearly identified a separate cluster and which represent the blue color flowers, and another cluster which represent white group and pink color group. Here you can see the scatter plot. It also clearly separate it into 2. And it was confirmed with the molecular studies as well. This one is the blue group, this one is the pink and white group. So we have corrected the taxonomic error and we reinstate the variety levels, and we again identified this blue color flower as Nymphaea nouchali variety nouchali, and the white and pink color flowers as Nymphaea nouchali variety versicolor. So identification of the variety level difference is important for conservation. So now we can conserve both pink as well as white and blue and white and pink color varieties. So with that, we have come across with a very important finding, nationally important finding, erroneous identification of the national flower of Sri Lanka. National flower of Sri Lanka was identified in 1986, and Nymphaea nouchali was recognized as the national flower of Sri Lanka. Nymphaea nouchali is known as blue water lily. But unfortunately, they use this flower, violet color water lily, as the national flower of Sri Lanka, and they named it as Nymphaea nouchali. But during the field studies, we found this plant, so we recognized that this is the correct Nymphaea nouchali. So for 30 years, we have been using this violet color flower as Nymphaea nouchali, and we call it blue water lily, and we used it as the national flower of Sri Lanka. So now it has been corrected. Now we are using the correct flower. So not only in our websites, government web portal, even we have issued the stamp in school books also. We depict this flower as the national flower. But this flower has a lot of sociological, cultural, medicinal, and religious importance. So this is the correct national flower, Nymphaea nouchali. So then a question came, what is the name of this flower? Violet color water lily. It doesn't have any name. So again, we have conducted morphological studies as well as molecular studies, And based on that, we have identified this as an hybrid, and we named it as Nymphaea erangae. So now this has a name, Nymphaea erangae. It's an hybrid. So we named this flower after my son, Eranga, because during his childhood, he used to come with us in our field visits. And even today, when we are not in a very good position to take photographs, he helped us a lot in taking photographs. So we named this flower after him, Nymphaea erangae. He's Eranga. Here you can see my son. So if you look at this hybrid, you can see a very interesting feature. If you look at the upper side of the leaf, it has a small notch, and later it developed into a plantlet. We called it vivipary. So in this hybrid, we have a viviparous leaves. So every single leaf can produce a plantlet. So it has a very rapid mode of spread. It can spread and cover our water bodies in a very shorter period of time. So it's a big threat to the native plants as well, because it's a hybrid. It has very well adapted to conditions of our country. So how did we recognize parents of this plant? So this viviparous nature was present in only single naturally occurring water lily in the world. This is called Nymphaea micrantha. It's a West African plant. This is widely used to produce horticultural varieties of water lilies. So this viviparous nature is present only in Nymphaea micrantha. So we have guessed one parent. So this study was supported by morphometric analysis as well as molecular data, and we have identified the hybrid parents as well as Nymphaea micrantha and Nymphaea caerulea. So now this has a scientific name. Then when you look at the literature, not nationally, even internationally, still this plant is not identified correctly. And in certain publications, this is still identified as Nymphaea nouchali, and it called blue water lily. So that erroneous identification is not happened only in Sri Lanka. Globally, you can see this problem. Even when you search Nymphaea nouchali in the web, and you can find certain research publication. In certain research publication, they used to give an image of the flower, then you can recognize the flower, whether they have identified it correctly or not. So still in certain publication, you can see it has not been identified correctly, and this is called Nymphaea nouchali and blue water lily. So the problem is, specifically when scientists do research on anti-cancer properties or antioxidant properties, antibacterial activities, if they do not use the correct plant, it will be a real issue. So correct plant identification is vital. I want to stress this because globally we have seen some other examples. Also, in certain cases, scientists in certain cases have not identified the plant correctly, so it can give some detrimental effects. So on the other hand, when scientists do research on certain plants in the lab, they might not have even seen a plant. They might have get the plants from a third party. So the scientists, researchers in labs, they just conduct research experiments and they try to identify and isolate the compounds. They might not have any knowledge on plant identification. And in the most of the publication, they never give a scientific description to the plant in the case of other studies, like anti-cancer properties, studies on anti-cancer properties. So we don't know whether they have identified the name plant correctly or not. This is not happening everywhere, but there is a possibility, right? So if you look at the today, we have a lot of online images, online apps are available. So a lot of young biologists, field biologists, they use online apps for plant identification. It's very good, it's very easy, but we have to be very careful, because if sometimes mistakes can happen, as pointed out by a scientist in UK. According to this scientist, mean accuracy of animal species identified is not uniform, and it's between 69 to 96%. So there could be some problems when you use online apps. So you have to be, I think, very, very careful. So fortunately or unfortunately for tropical plants in our country, we don't have apps because most of the plants are not in online apps. So when we use these apps also, we have to be a bit careful. So with that, let me move to, that is all about the conservation of biodiversity, my contribution for the conservation of biodiversity. Now let me move to my research experience in sustainable utilization of biodiversity. So if you look at Sri Lanka is blessed in biodiversity, but unfortunately, if you look at our anthropogenic landscapes, they are full of exotic plants, colorful plants, and they hardly use any native ornamental plants in the landscape industry. So we have conducted the study with the nursery industry in Sri Lanka, and we found that there is no demand for native plants in Sri Lanka because in nurseries they don't sell native plants because there is no demand. It is very unfortunate situation. If you look at the other countries, they widely use native plants in outdoor areas in anthropogenic landscape, but in our country, very pathetic situation. But it is not common not only Sri Lanka, to the South Asian region I know this is very common. We prefer for colorful, attractive exotics. So educating people on native plants is very important because it can give not only aesthetic, but we can get a lot of other benefits. So we have conducted a lot of studies to explore wild plants which has ornamental potential. Particularly, we have conducted studies in the dry zone and the intermediate zone of the country, because when we find a plant in the dry zone or intermediate zone, we can easily introduce into the wet zone. But if wet zone plants cannot be grown in most cases in the dry zone. So we mainly focused on dry zone and intermediate zone. So we explore, and when we see a plant, potential plant, we identify it correctly, we study the distribution, then we evaluate the plant for different aspects, because before popularizing, we should know cheap low-cost propagation method. Then we should know the aesthetic beauty. It is important to know the ethnobotany, other uses, because in tropical parts of the world, we widely use these plants for other uses, like some are edible, some have medicinal properties, some are multi-purpose, then plant-animal interactions. So after conducting these evaluations, we have conducted field trials, and this is the most difficult part, commercialization. As there is no demand, we can't popularize it, commercialize it. That is the bottleneck. So we have to educate people on native plants before commercialization. So these are few examples for potential wild plants which has a potential as a landscape plant. So Helicteric Kisora, again, it has a very attractive flowers. It bloom in the early morning, 2 o'clock. Initially, it is blue purple in color. Later in the day, it turned to brick red color, and these blue color flowers has lot of nectar, so lot of birds and insects visit this plant. And this is a multi-purpose plant. So traditionally we used to make boxes and other things, even furniture. So we can improve this technology and use these things. So because there is a renewed demand for the eco-friendly products, and we have constructed, established a hedge in the university, and it's a very thick hedge, so you can use it for screening purposes. So again, this is another plant, Memisilum umbulatum or blue mist. Again, it has a very attractive flower, and we have also developed the propagation technique, low-cost propagation technique for this plant. And this is another example, Osbekia octandra. Again, this is a multi-purpose plant. It has medicinal value, as well as leaves are edible. Again, this one, Woodwardia fruticosa. This plant has a very attractive architecture, so it has drooping branches, and it also produces a lot of nectar, so a lot of birds used to visit this plant. So in wildlife gardening, to attract pollinators, we can promote these native plants because they actually produce attractive flowers. And the low-cost propagation techniques are also available now. And these are a few examples for non-woody plants, herbaceous plants, Celosia argentea. again, we use scarified seeds. Sorry, scarified seeds recorded 95% germination rate. So we can recommend that seed scarification for propagation. And if you look at this native plant, it is very much closer to the exotic introduced ornamental plant. And this plant attracts a lot of pollinators. Again, if you look at Crotalaria retusa, again, it produces attractive flowers, and it also attracts a lot of pollinators. And the uniqueness of this plant is this leaves of this plant produce a chemical called pyrolusidine. It is an alkaloid. So male blue tiger butterflies visit this plant in large numbers to get this chemical alkaloid, so that they can produce pheromones and they can attract female butterflies. So you can see large number of male butterflies visiting this plant. So you can use that that phenomenon to promote the concept of wildlife gardening in our country, because I know most of the tropical countries, the concept of wildlife gardening is not that popular. Okay, so we have also attempted to develop dwarf plants out of these native plants, because in Sri Lanka there's a very high demand for new plants, novel varieties. So the studies are still ongoing. And if you look at our country, I told you that exotics have a very high demand. And if you look at our landscape, our landscapes are dominated with colorful horticultural based planting designs, like these designs. So they require high maintenance cost. And this doesn't support much pollinators, but they are colorful. So people like this type of design. So we try to introduce eco-friendly planting designs for certain areas in the country. So we have we use 3 designs. This is the first design. Here in design, we use ruderals. So all are wild plants, naturally occurring wild plants, ruderal design. Then this is the mixed design, which consists with all the ruderals, 7 ruderal species, plus popular ornamental exotic Xenia elegans. And this one, only Xenia elegans. It is exotic ornamental plant. So we use 3 designs. Only ruderals plus exotic, ornamental, only exotic common ornamental. So in this ruderal design, we use 7 different species, which consist with naturalized, exotic and native plants. And we studied the aesthetic preference for these plots, and majority of the environmentalists prefer mixed design. They gave first rank for this design, followed by this design. But majority of the university community rank this design, exotic design, as the best design. So if you look at the university community, that group consists with laborers and other administrative staff, not the academic staff related working on the environment related STEM subjects. So this group resembles the general public. So it clearly gives the idea of the ordinary people. So they like this design, but environmentalists, they prefer this design, followed by this design. So when we look at the insect visitation, this design, ruderal design, attracted significantly high number of insects, 87, followed by this design, mixed design, and this design attracted significantly lower number of insects. So for insect conservation, for the conservation of pollinators, specifically in abundant lands, in roadsides, we can promote this sort of design. But in anthropogenic landscapes, in public landscape, as people like to see some beauty, we can use mixed design. So still it attracts high number of insects instead of this design. So we are in the process of promoting these sort of designs in anthropogenic landscapes. So if you look at these details of these 7 ruderals, Tridax procumbens attracted the highest number of insects, 65, followed by Leucus selnica. So Tridax procumbens is exotic naturalized plant. This is native plant. So you can see even exotics can be used to attract pollinators. So when we study the phenology of these ruderals, these two exotics has the longer flowering period compared to other plants. So these other group flowered and they shed their seeds and they start to germinate, but still you can see the flowers of these two species. Both are exotic. So if you look at the flower interest chart, you can see color. These two exotics has given color aesthetic effect for longer duration. So in designing, we can use, actually in tropical context, we can use not only natives, even exotics as well. Just like in England, UK, they are widely used promoting ecologically based planting designs where they use exotics as well as natives. They use exotics because to give aesthetic effect, because aesthetic is considered as an important ecosystem service, because if public doesn't accept our designs, they will not use it. So we have to think about the public acceptance as well. So in Sri Lanka also, I think most of the tropical countries, we can use both natives and exotic. But during my visit to US, I have noticed it's in Illinois, Chicago, they widely use natives. Even ordinary gardens, home gardens, they widely use natives. They know the concepts behind using natives, and even public landscapes are covered with natives. It's very interesting to see, and a lot of people have the idea, they know the importance of using native plants, so they are educated, very well educated. But unfortunately, in our part of the world, it is not still popular. So it's important to popular native plants in anthropogenic landscape. Okay, with that, let me share you some research experience on sustainable utilization of biodiversity in a different perspective. So as you all know, any plant can be used to trap particulate matter present in air. But we all know that certain plants have a better capability to trap more particulate matter. So we have measured the particulate matter interception ability of shrubs in anthropogenic landscape. We measured them gravimetrically, and we found certain plants have a better capability. Then we study the morphological characters of those plants. So those plants possess longer internodes, longer petioles, large leaves, non-entire margins. They present trichomes, and trichomes are present in high density. Density of the trichomes is high. So these characters contribute for significantly high interception of particulate matter. So in urban areas, specifically in tropical countries, air is polluted with a lot of dust, because country is not, we have a dry spell, so air is polluted with not only dust particle, even with pollen, as well as fumes generated from the vehicles. So as an example, in Sri Lanka, respiratory diseases is recognized as the second highest positive factor for hospitalization of patients. So it is a real issue, respiratory diseases related to the respiratory tract. So we can use this group of plants to trap more particulate matter. So we have identified best plants out of the plant studied. So if you look at this one, this is called Helicteric isora, a native wild plant. It has high hair density in the leaves, and this is one of the best plants to trap particulate matter. Apart from this wild plant, we have identified some exotic ornamental plants as well, which has high capability to trap particulate matter present in air. So specifically, if in Sri Lanka, particularly in schools, kids used to wait just close to the periphery or the boundary of the schools. They are waiting for their parents, and they are playing. And this is screened with the wire mesh, covered with the wire mesh for protection, but it is not screened properly. So to get rid of this problem, pollution, contamination with particulate matter, dust, we can use hedges to cover these places. So when we use hedges, we can use the best plants which can trap more particulate matter. As an example, in most of the urban areas, we use trees for screening purposes, but bottom side of the tree doesn't have any branches. So if we can cover the lower part of the stem with suitable shrubs, we can get good benefit. We can reap the benefits of using correct plants, because we can cut down the dust particles. Again, in another study, we studied we tried to integrate the textural groups of shrubs into the planting design, because in landscape designers, they promote the use of different textural groups to get visual perceptions. As an example, they recommend to use coarse textured leaves and smooth textured leaves to get certain visual perceptions. So let me explain it further. As an example, if you look at this brick paving pattern, this is called running bond. These bricks are parallelly placed. And if you look at this one, here you can see parallel as well as horizontally placed bricks. If you look at this one, a path paved with running bond pattern, the path seems to be longer, but here path seems to be shorter, because in urban spaces, we have limited space. So in landscape designers tend to use these patterns to give visual perceptions, to fill the space longer. Similarly, let me come back to plants. They recommend to use coarse textured plants close to the weaver and smooth textured plants away from the weaver, so that the space seems to be larger, and vice versa. But they categorize plants based on their visual, experience, empirical knowledge, but a particular criteria has not been used for the classification. So we have conducted the study with large number of shrubs, and we studied the morphological features of shrubs, and we studied a lot of quantitative and qualitative morphological characters of shrubs, and we have identified certain characters as contributing characters for this separation. So this is the dendrogram generated from the study. We have clearly identified two groups. Again, this group is further divided into two. So one group resembles coarse textured leaves, other group smooth texture and medium textured leaves. So certain characters significantly contribute for the separation. If you look at the leaf area, petiole length, internodal distance, we recognize them as significantly contributing characters. Then leaf hair density, length of leaf hairs, leaf arrangement, leaf margin, and venation as the secondary characters contributed for the separation. So now we have a scientific method to classify plants into textural groups. So we can use these coarse textured plants in urban green infrastructure establishment to not only get visual perceptions, but also to get particulate matter interception, to get health benefits, as well as in noise mitigation. So still we have not published our work, and so we proposed a method, scientific method for this classification. Okay, with that, let me move to the final topic, threats to the biodiversity. So if you look at the biodiversity of the country, though we are rich in biodiversity, we widely use exotic plants in the aquarium industry, because we have a world rank in aquarium industry. We import a lot of plants to our country, propagate them locally, and export them back. It is a lucrative business. So we earn a lot of foreign exchange through this industry. But as you all know, certain plants can escape from man-made controlled environments and invade into natural areas and become invasive. So we have recorded 4 such examples from Sri Lanka. These 3 plants, Mica fluviatilis, Ludwigia sedioides, Echinodora species, were recorded in 2006 as escapes from ornamental industry. Then Kabomba furcata, we recorded this plant very recently in Sri Lanka. So this can become invasive in near future. Not all, certain plants, like it can become another Salvinia or Econia crassipus. I hope you all are familiar with those 2 plants. This is a problematic plant in tropics. So horticulture industry is blamed for introduction of these plants. So let me go through 2 plants very quickly. Ludwigia sedioides, it is a very attractive plant. Native range is Brazil and Venezuela. And it's popular in outdoor landscaping as well as in aquariums. But this plant is still not recorded as an invasive plant in any part of the world. But if you look at Sri Lanka, we first recorded this plant in 2006. It was in 2 water bodies. In 2017, it spread up to nearly 50 water bodies. Now we are not in a position to control. So you all know that early detection and action is the most suitable method of controlling new invasions. But unfortunately, though we detect it early, action has not been taken for eradication. So you can see here, this water body, it has spread into the downstream as well. This is the water body. If you look at the water body like this, you know you can't control it, because it is very well adapted to dry conditions. Even dried up water bodies, you can see it is still surviving. And during floods, it produced long stems, so still it can survive. And even 1 centimeter fragment of top cutting or stem cutting can produce a plant. So fragmentation is even 1 centimeter fragment can produce plants. So it is a real threat. So using mechanical techniques are questionable. Again, we recorded this plant, Mica fluviatilis. It is also recorded as invasive plant in South America, Caribbean, and it's present in the US. It's a native range in southern part of the US as well. So it is also spread rapidly in our country. And again, this plant, we studied the propagation, and even 2 centimeter fragment is capable of propagating into a new plant. So fragmentation is an issue. So we have to be very careful when we control them using mechanical methods. So with that, negative comments on negative research on the biodiversity, let me wind up my presentation with the positive note. So as I mentioned you all earlier, we are rich in biodiversity. We have attractive plants, potential plants for the landscape industry in anthropogenic landscapes. But unfortunately, all our anthropogenic landscapes are full with colorful exotics, and our nurseries, they never sell natives. So it is important to promote natives. And for that, we have to educate people. That is the most important thing, because now potential plants, propagation techniques, potential other uses, everything is available, but the bottleneck is people are not aware about these uses. So my ambition is to promote the native plants in Sri Lanka, so that our landscapes will be pollinator friendly and full of multi-purpose plants. Thank you very much. So I would like to specially thank all my collaborators as well as my research students for contributing for my research career, as well as I would like to acknowledge Fulbright Commission for granting me fellowship to come to US and to witness, to conduct some research at UIC. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Kapila, for a very interesting and enlightening seminar and an introduction to our series this fall. We do have a couple minutes for some questions. There were a few in the Q&A, if you are amenable. The first question was from Mike Goodman, who was asking if the civil conflict in Sri Lanka had any impact on biodiversity.
Yes, actually, earlier we had some disturbances. So during that time, we couldn't study the biodiversity of the north and east part of the country. But now country is open, anybody can visit any place. Now it doesn't affect. Now it's no problem. We don't have any problem.
Okay, well, that's a positive thing to hear. Problems are in the past. So you mentioned the very lucrative aquarium plants, aquatic plants trade, and how that influences both the economy and the horticultural practices of Sri Lanka. Are there major problems with poaching and illegal collection of plants, both aquatic plants and woody plants like logging? Can you talk a little bit about those illicit industries?
Yeah, so very good question. Again, thank you very much for raising that question. Yes, actually, illegal collection is a real threat to the biodiversity of the country because specifically, as I mentioned, majority of our animals and plants are large group is endemic and highly threatened. And if you look at aquatic plants, some groups are highly threatened. And if you remember the Lagenandra group where I work, distribution is restricted. And if you look at the population in certain plants, we have 20, 30 plants. So if illegal collection is going to continue, it can disappear very fast because they collect plants in large numbers. Because in the history, in Sri Lanka, people collect plants in large numbers from the wild and export it. Now that is banned, but still illegal collections are there because there we have laws and regulations, but there are a lot of loopholes in the laws and regulation. And so the popularity of this industry is a real threat. Again, illegal, I mean, encroachment, these things are happening. Yes, it is a big issue. And environmentalists raise their voice against these things. The problem is, if you look at our country, 20% of the land is covered with forest. And nearly 40% of the land is assigned for agriculture. So 60%, only 40% left for infrastructure and for other facilities. So there's a very high pressure for land because our country is a small island. So unavailability of land is a real issue. So, but if you look at urbanization, we don't face urbanization. Globally, it's more than 50% now. But in our country, it's close to 30%, less than 30%. So still urbanization is not problem. So I think when urban areas, we can go for high-rising buildings. So there will be less pressure on available land.
Wonderful. Well, if we have time for maybe one more question, if there's another one that comes up, give people just a minute. But otherwise, thank you so much, Dr. Yakandawala, for sharing the wide breadth of knowledge and exposing many of us here in the U.S. to a system that I didn't know hardly anything about, and I learned a lot today. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us, and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to thank Carey Institute for inviting me for this seminar. Thank you very much.